Be me, Marion. I live in one of those cities where everyone has an opinion and a podcast. You know the type. Lots of coffee shops, everyone dresses the same to look different. I had this project I was working on a while back, maybe late last year. The goal was to get a look inside one of those men's spaces you hear about online. Specifically, a group of guys who call themselves MGTOW. My friends and I used to joke about them all the time. We pictured them in basements, surrounded by empty pizza boxes, complaining about women online. The working theory was that they were all just bitter because they couldn't get a date. I figured it would be an easy, straightforward piece. Go in, document the sadness, write about the echo chamber of male toxicity, and be done with it. I found a local group through a very basic website. Looked like it was made in the early 2000s. No angry manifestos, just a simple contact form and a schedule for workshop days. I crafted an email, presenting myself as a neutral observer doing some research on modern communities. I kept it vague but professional, expecting either a paranoid refusal or an angry tirade. The response came a day later. It was maybe 3 sentences long. It was from a guy named Ethan. He said I was welcome to come observe their next workshop day. The only rules were not to interrupt the work and to stay out of the way of any heavy machinery. That was it. No questions, no suspicion. Just a time and an address. This was already not what I expected. The lack of hostility was unsettling. I told my friends about it over brunch that weekend. They thought it was hilarious and brave. My friend Kevin was there. He's one of those guys who's always just around. Super helpful, always offering to do things. A classic good guy. He immediately offered to drive me there, just in case they were dangerous. He suggested he could wait in the car, be my backup. I remember laughing and telling him he was sweet, but I could handle a few sad men by myself. He looked a little disappointed, but he just nodded and offered to help me check the air in my tires before I went. I let him. It made him feel useful, I guess. So the following Saturday, I drove out to the address. It was in an industrial part of town I'd never been to before, all warehouses and chain-link fences, a world away from my neighborhood of murals and bike lanes. I pulled up to a large, unassuming metal building. No signs, just a number on the door. For a second, I actually got a little nervous. But I took a deep breath, grabbed my notebook, and went inside. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It wasn't stale beer and despair. It was sawdust, oil, and something metallic, like hot steel. The place was huge, a massive workshop, brightly lit and surprisingly organized. Tools were hung neatly on the walls. Different workstations were set up around the floor. And there were men, maybe a dozen of them. But they weren't huddled around computers. They were working. One guy, built like a refrigerator and covered in grease, was methodically taking apart a car engine on a stand. This had to be Todd. Another, a thinner guy with glasses, was in a corner surrounded by what looked like server racks, typing intently on a laptop. That must be Neil. In the center of the room, an older man was showing a younger kid how to use a wood lathe. A man who I assumed was Ethan came over. He was lean, calm-looking, maybe in his late 30s. He wasn't what I pictured. He didn't look angry. He looked content. He just wiped his hands on a rag and nodded at me. He told me I was Marion, and I said yes. He pointed to a stool near the wall and said I could sit there. Then he just turned around and went back to what he was doing, which was sanding a large piece of oak. And that was my welcome. No one else even looked up. It was the weirdest thing. I felt completely invisible. I was a woman, in a space supposedly defined by its relationship to women, and they acted like I was a piece of furniture. It was deeply unnerving. I was expecting to have to fend off weird comments or awkward advances. Instead, I got nothing. Total indifference. I sat there for hours, just watching. The sounds were of work, The whine of a power saw, the clang of metal, the quiet hum of computers. They barely talked to each other. But when they did, it was efficient. Todd, need a hand with that engine block? Neil, is the network back up? Just a sec. There was a flow to it, a quiet competence. They were a team. They were building things, fixing things. Around noon, someone fired up a large grill outside, and they all took a break for lunch. Ethan gestured for me to join them. I sat at the edge of their picnic table, expecting the real talk to begin. Now they'd start complaining. Now the toxicity would come out. But it didn't. They talked about the project car Todd was restoring. They talked about the new solar panels Neil wanted to install on the roof to get the workshop off-grid. They argued about whether Star Trek or Star Wars had better ship designs. It was all so normal. It was like a Boy Scout meeting for adults. I tried to steer the conversation. I asked Ethan what the ultimate goal of the group was. He took a bite of his burger and thought for a moment. He said the goal was to build a space where men could learn practical skills and rely on each other. He called it building personal sovereignty. I asked him if he thought it was healthy to cut women out of their lives like that. He just shrugged. He told me they don't cut women out. They just don't build their lives around them. He said their happiness and sense of purpose had to come from within themselves and their brotherhood, not from external validation. Another guy chimed in, saying he wasn't against women. He was just retired from the dating scene. He said it was like a game he'd gotten tired of playing, so he just put the controller down. I tried to push, asking if they didn't feel lonely. Todd, the huge mechanic, laughed for the first time all day. He looked at me, his hands still covered in grease, and said it was hard to feel lonely when you're busy replacing a transmission. The other guys chuckled. It wasn't a mean laugh. It was a genuine, that's a good point kind of laugh. I felt my angle for the article slipping away. These weren't the broken, angry men I was promised. They were calm. They were focused. They were happy. It didn't make sense. Their happiness was supposed to be a performance, a coping mechanism. But watching them, it seemed real. It was quiet, solid, and had nothing to do with me. I went back a few more times over the next couple of weeks. Every time it was the same story. I watched them build a custom hydroponics system in the back. I saw Neil teach a class on basic cybersecurity to the other members. I watched Ethan and Todd frame a wall for a new office space inside the warehouse. I was trying to find the cracks in the facade. I'd ask them about their past relationships, trying to get them to open up about their supposed trauma. Most of them would just give me a polite, brief answer. One guy told me he was divorced. He said he lost his house and his kids, and he decided he wasn't going to take that kind of risk again. He didn't say it with anger. He said it with the calm finality of someone stating a fact, like the sky is blue or water is wet. It was a calculated decision, not an emotional outburst. They saw relationships not as a source of joy, but as a potential liability. They had done a cost-benefit analysis and found the risk outweighed the reward. I argued with Ethan about it one afternoon. I told him that was a cynical way to live, that you couldn't build a society on that kind of transactional thinking. He was cleaning a handplane at his workbench. He didn't even look up. He told me they weren't trying to build a society. They were just trying to build their own lives. He said they were focused on what they could control, their skills, their finances, their own peace of mind. Everything else was just noise. My project was going nowhere. I had no material for a hit piece. All I had were notes on competent men being competent together. My editor was getting impatient. She kept asking for the juicy details, the proof of their misogyny. I had nothing. Then, about a month into my research, my own world started to fall apart. It started with my car. I was driving home late one night from a friend's place when it just died. Middle of a quiet street, everything just shut off. Lights, engine, everything. Dead. I'm not a car person. I know how to put gas in it, and that's about it. I did what I always do when I have a problem. I called people. First, I called a guy from my circle of friends, a fellow male ally. He's always talking a big game about dismantling patriarchal structures. I told him my car broke down and asked if he could come give me a jump, or at least take a look. He got all weird on the phone. He started talking about how him coming to rescue me would reinforce a damsel in distress narrative. He literally said he wasn't comfortable performing that kind of gendered labor. He suggested I empower myself by calling a tow truck. Then he wished me luck and hung up. I was stunned. Okay, fine. I called another friend. He just didn't pick up. Then I started calling my girlfriends. The first one was super sympathetic. Oh my God, that's awful. Are you okay? Stay strong, you've got this. Lots of verbal support, zero practical solutions. The second one told me she couldn't help because she was in the middle of a new TV series and didn't want to lose her momentum. I sat there in my dead car, in the dark, feeling a kind of cold I hadn't felt before. All my friends, my whole support network, they were great with words. They could deconstruct a problematic movie for hours. They could offer endless streams of validation and encouragement. But when faced with a real physical problem, a problem that required someone to get their hands dirty, they were useless. Finally, after about an hour of this, I swallowed my pride and did what I always did when I was truly stuck. I called Kevin, reliable Kevin, good old Kevin, the one who would drop anything to come help. I dialed his number, already preparing my slightly annoyed, "Where have you been?" tone. He picked up on the second ring. Hello? I launched into my story, explaining what happened. I ended with, "So, can you come get me? I'm over on 12th Street. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a longer pause than I was used to from him. Then he said, "Marion, I can't tonight." I was so shocked I couldn't even speak for a second. I asked him why not. What could possibly be more important? His voice was different. It wasn't apologetic or flustered. It was calm. He just said, "I'm in the middle of a project of my own. It's important." I couldn't believe it. I asked him what kind of project. He said he was learning how to welding. He was choosing hot metal over me. I started to get angry, to lay on the guilt. I told him I was stranded, that it was dark, that I was scared. The old Kevin would have folded instantly. He would have been apologizing profusely and already in his car. But this new Kevin just listened. When I was done, he said, "That sounds tough. You should probably call roadside assistance. They're really good for this kind of thing. Anyway, I've got to get back to it. Talk to you later." And he hung up. He hung up on me. I sat there, phone in my hand, in complete and utter shock. My entire social safety net had evaporated in the space of an hour. The men were useless ideologues. The women were useless cheerleaders. And my ever-faithful safety option had just told me to call a professional. I was completely and totally alone. I felt a surge of panic, then a wave of pure rage. I sat there for another half hour, fuming, trying to figure out what to do. The tow truck would cost a fortune and take forever. And then I had a horrible, humiliating idea. There was a group of people I knew who could actually fix things, who dealt with real-world problems. My hand was shaking as I scrolled through my call history. I found the number for the workshop. I'd gotten it from Ethan in case I needed to cancel a visit. I took a deep breath and called. Ethan answered. His voice was calm as ever. I felt a hot flush of shame. I couldn't tell him the truth. So I lied. I told him my phone had died and I'd just managed to get it working again, and his was the only number I could remember. A total lie. I told him my car had broken down not too far from his workshop. I asked, in the most pathetic voice I could manage, if there was any chance someone could just take a look. He didn't ask any questions. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just asked for my location and said someone would be there in 20 minutes. Exactly 19 minutes later, a big old pickup truck pulled up behind me. Todd got out. He didn't say a word, just gave me a short nod. He popped my hood and shone a massive flashlight inside. I stood there by the side of the road, feeling about 2 inches tall. I tried to make small talk, to fill the awkward silence. He just grunted in response, his focus entirely on the engine. After maybe 5 minutes of poking around, he went back to his truck and came back with a toolbox. He replaced a small black box with a new one from his kit. It took him maybe 30 seconds. He told me to try starting it. I got in the car, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. I almost cried with relief. I got out of the car, gushing with thanks, offering to pay him for his time. He just shook his head. He handed me a small invoice for the part he replaced. It was like $30. He told me the part was cheap, but the labor to have a dealership do it would have been a few hundred. He said I could drop the cash off at the workshop whenever. I tried to thank him again, but he was already walking back to his truck. He just gave me another nod, got in, and drove away. No lecture, no smug satisfaction, no see what happens when you're helpless. Just a problem, identified and solved. I stood on the sidewalk next to my running car, and I felt nothing, just a profound sense of emptiness. He hadn't rescued me. He had performed a service. I wasn't a damsel, I was a client. The transaction was clean, professional, and completely devoid of the emotion and drama that my entire life was built on. It was the most humiliating experience of my life. I drove home that night in a complete haze. The car ran perfectly, smoothly, better than it had in months. Every hum of the engine felt like an accusation, a testament to a world of competence I had no access to and didn't understand, a world I had planned to mock. The next day, I put $30 in an envelope and drove back to the industrial park. I didn't want to go in. I couldn't face them. I just slipped the envelope through the mail slot in the big metal door. I felt like I was leaving an offering at the altar of a strange masculine god. I tried to get back to my life, to forget the whole thing. I told my friends a fabricated story about an old family friend who happened to be a mechanic and was in the area. They all bought it. It was easier than explaining the truth. I even tried to work on my article, but the words felt like ash in my mouth. How could I write about their pathetic lives when they had just so effortlessly solved a problem that had completely stumped my own world? Every time I typed male toxicity, I saw Todd's greasy, capable hands. Every time I wrote fragile masculinity, I heard Ethan's calm, indifferent voice. My life felt thin, brittle. And then it broke. It happened on a rainy Tuesday, a few weeks later. I came home from work to find a dark, ugly stain spreading across the ceiling of my living room, and a steady drip, 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 into a growing puddle on my hardwood floor. The upstairs neighbor's pipe had burst. My first call was to my landlord. He was some guy who lived 3 states away and managed the property through an app. I sent him frantic pictures. He sent back an automated response saying he'd log a ticket with his preferred maintenance company. Their earliest availability was sometime next week. Meanwhile, the drip was getting faster. The stain was getting bigger. I panicked. I called my male ally friend again, the one who wouldn't help with the car. I figured a plumbing crisis was less gendered labor and more of a general emergency. He told me he was really sorry, but he didn't know anything about plumbing. He suggested I put a bucket under it. Truly groundbreaking advice. I called Kevin. I wasn't even angry anymore, just desperate. He didn't answer. I called again. It went straight to voicemail. I think he blocked my number. The thought was so alien, so impossible that I couldn't process it at first. Kevin, who for years had been my personal 24/7 helpline, had just opted out. The drip continued. Drip, 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 like a clock ticking down on my sanity. I spent the next 2 days calling every plumber in the city. Because of the storm, they were all swamped. Everyone was quoting me insane emergency fees and week-long wait times. My apartment was starting to smell like mildew. The floorboards were starting to warp. My landlord was unreachable. My friends offered tweets of sympathy. I was living in a slow-motion disaster, and my entire social structure was a useless facade. On the third day, a piece of the ceiling plaster fell into the bucket with a wet slap. That was it. That was the breaking point. I knew where I had to go. I hated myself for it. But the primal need for shelter, for a dry place to live, was stronger than my pride. I drove back to the workshop. This time, I didn't park down the street. I pulled right up to the door. I walked in without knocking. The scene was the same as always. Men working. The smell of industry. Ethan was at his workbench. He saw me and his eyebrows went up just a little. It was the most surprise I'd ever seen him express. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, rainwater dripping from my coat, probably looking like a drowned rat. I think I just blurted it out. A pipe burst in my apartment. My ceiling is falling in, and my landlord won't do anything. I didn't ask for help. I just stated the problem, a cold, hard fact. Ethan looked at me for a long moment. He put down his tool. He called Todd over. Neil glanced up from his computer. Ethan asked me a few questions. What floor I was on, where the main water shutoff was. I didn't know the answer to any of them. He sighed. It wasn't an angry sigh. It was a tired sigh. The sigh of a competent person dealing with an incompetent one. He told Todd to grab the plumbing kit and some tarps. He looked at me. Show us where you live. They followed me back to my apartment. Todd in his truck, Ethan in his own car. They walked into my place and didn't even flinch at the mess. They were like a surgical team. Ethan found the main water valve for the building in a basement closet I didn't know existed and shut it off. Todd laid out tarps and moved my furniture with an efficiency that was almost terrifying. They cut a neat square out of my ruined ceiling, located the burst pipe, and got to work. I just stood in the corner of my own home, feeling like a guest. I offered them coffee. They politely refused. They had a job to do. They worked for almost 2 hours. There was the sound of a saw, the hiss of a blowtorch. I heard them talking quietly, using terms I didn't understand. Copper pipe, PEX fitting, pressure loss. It was another language, the language of the real world. While they worked, I had nothing to do but look around my own apartment. I saw the books on my shelves, full of dense theories about social power structures. I saw the posters on my walls, with empowering but ultimately meaningless slogans. I saw my laptop, where I was supposed to be writing an article about how men like these were the problem. And then I looked at them. 2 men, covered in dust and plaster, who were literally holding the roof over my head together. The contrast was so stark, so brutal, it made me feel dizzy. When they were finished, the leak was gone. They had replaced a whole section of pipe. It was a clean, professional job. Todd even patched the hole in the ceiling with a temporary piece of drywall, telling me my landlord would have to handle the plaster and paint. They packed up their tools. They cleaned up their mess. They left my apartment in better condition than they found it. I stood by the door as they were about to leave, my wallet in my hand. What do I owe you? Ethan looked at me. His expression wasn't smug or condescending. It was almost sad. We're not plumbers, Marion. We don't charge for helping people who are in a bind. He paused. Consider it a lesson in community, real community, not the kind you talk about, the kind you build, with your hands. And that's when I snapped. All the frustration, the humiliation, the cognitive dissonance of the past month just boiled over. A lesson? You think you can lecture me? My voice was high and shaky. You guys are the ones living in a fantasy, hiding from the world in your little clubhouse because you can't handle strong women. You talk about building things, but all you're doing is running away. You're afraid. You're just a bunch of hurt little boys who decided to take your toys and go home because you lost the game." I was yelling now. I wanted to hurt them. I wanted to see a crack in their infuriating calm. You hate women. That's all this is. You can pretend it's about sovereignty and brotherhood, but it's just pure, pathetic misogyny. I stood there, breathing heavily, my accusations hanging in the damp air. Todd just looked at me with a blank expression, like I was a strange animal he'd never seen before. But Ethan just watched me. He let me finish. He absorbed the whole tirade without a flinch. When I was done, the silence was deafening. Then he spoke. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. "We're not afraid of you, Marion. We're not angry with you. You want to know the truth?" He took a step closer. "We don't think about you at all. This," he said, gesturing around the workshop that wasn't there, but that I could see in my mind, "this has nothing to do with you, or any woman. This is about us. This is about men creating value for themselves and for each other, because we've realized that in the modern world, we're valued for nothing else. We're seen as disposable. Our utility is the only currency we have left. You call us hurt," he continued, his voice still low and even. "Maybe we were, but we're not anymore. We're busy. We're learning. We're building. We're creating. We found a peace you can't even imagine, because it's not dependent on anyone else's approval, especially not yours. You came to our space to look for toxicity. You wanted to find hate, but you didn't. You found competence. You found purpose. You found brotherhood. And it broke your brain because it doesn't fit your narrative." He looked me dead in the eye. "The real reason you're angry isn't because you think we hate you. It's because you've just discovered, in the most undeniable way possible, that we don't need you. And that terrifies you. The idea that a group of men can be genuinely, profoundly happy without you. It shatters your entire worldview. Because if we don't need you," he finished, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "then what is all your power for?" At that exact moment, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A reflex. I pulled it out. It was a text from my editor. "Marion, where's that MGTOW article? We need to run it tomorrow. Make sure it's extra savage. Really highlight how miserable they are." I read the words on the screen. How miserable they are. I looked up from my phone. Todd was already heading out the door, probably eager to get back to his engine. Ethan was looking at me with an expression of profound pity, and it all just crashed. The theories, the articles, the social justice, the brunches, the hashtags, the entire fragile scaffolding of my belief system collapsed in an instant, leaving me in free fall. He was right. They weren't miserable. They were the furthest thing from it. They were free. And I was the one in the cage, a cage I had built for myself, out of words and ideology. I looked at my phone, the symbol of my world, a world of opinions, of signals, of words that meant nothing. Then I looked at the neatly patched pipe and the solid new piece of drywall in my ceiling, the symbol of their world, a world of action, of skill, of reality. I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. My anger was gone, replaced by a cold, hollow certainty. I just nodded once, turned away from him, and closed the door. I slid down to the floor, my back against the wood. I sat there for hours, in the silence of my dry apartment, long after the sound of their trucks had faded away. I didn't write the article. I told my editor the sources fell through. She was furious, but I didn't care. I just stopped. I never went back to the workshop. I never saw any of them again. Sometimes, late at night, I think about them. I picture them in that big, bright space, working under the lights, building, creating, fixing, laughing, perfectly, completely, and utterly happy. without me.